Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're about to get started in just a moment. Thank you. Please take your seats. Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum. My name is Joe Lopez. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Richard Nixon Foundation, and on behalf of our Board of Directors and the entire team at the Nixon Foundation, it's my honor to welcome you here this morning. We're especially grateful today to our partners at the Persian American Civic Action Network, PACAN, whose leadership and dedication to civic engagement continues to uplift the Iranian American community and bring vital conversations and programs like this to us today. To begin our program, I'm going to ask you to all please rise for the national anthems of the United States and Iran. Thank you. Please take your seats. We gather today at a moment of profound change in Iran and the Middle East. But before we turn to the present and the future, we must pause to remember the past and a friendship that shaped history. The connection between President Richard Nixon and His Imperial Majesty Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi was one of genuine friendship, mutual respect, and a shared vision. Their friendship spanned more than a quarter century, from their first meeting in Tehran in 1953 to their final meeting in 1979. The bond between President Nixon and the Shah was one of genuine friendship, as you're about to learn in this short video here in just a moment. And you're about to see some of President Nixon's notes that have never before seen publicly before. So please enjoy.
Shah Reza Pahlavi's long reign spanned 8 American presidential administrations. but it was his special relationship and personal friendship with President Nixon that made history and changed history. The Vice President and the Second Lady met the Shah for the first time in Tehran in December 1953. In notes he made at the time, Nixon described the Shah's quiet dignity. He was impressed by his probing, astute questions. He sensed an inner strength. He felt that he would become a strong leader. That 1953 meeting was the start of a uniquely personal relationship based on mutual respect that lasted almost 4 decades. 1 year later, they met again when the Shah came to Washington for 3 days of talks about military assistance and aid. Vice President and Mrs. Nixon welcomed him in Queen Soraya at National Airport. They met again in Washington in 1958. Nixon made notes of the conversations he had with the Shah in Tehran in 1967 during one of several international fact-finding trips he made as a private citizen. Talking about Faradiba, the Shah said, "The Queen has a great personality in her own right, and she will be the first woman regent in Iran history after their coronation a few months later." The Shah told RN, "No possibility to cool down the Arab-Israel conflict." The Shah believes US gave him bad political advice and said, "I will decide what system works for my people." Nixon's seminal article, Asia After Vietnam, was published in Foreign Affairs in October, and his discussions with the Shah played an important role in developing what became the Nixon Doctrine. 2 years later, 2 days after his inauguration in January 1969, the new president received a letter from his old friend. "I am fully convinced that with your intimate knowledge of this part of the world, and with due regard to the long-standing friendship and cordiality that exist between us, we will not fail to take every necessary measure for the further strengthening of the relations between our two countries on the basis of mutual respect and trust." In May 1969, the Shah came to Washington for President Eisenhower's funeral. In October, he returned on a state visit that marked a turning point in the relations between the two countries. The new president introduced a new grand strategy shifting the focus of Middle East policy to Iran as the cornerstone of regional stability and America's partner countering Soviet expansion. In 1972, the Shah and Shah Banu welcomed the President and First Lady to Iran. The friendship between Mrs. Nixon and the Empress deepened. This memorable visit has been described as the capstone event in the shift of US-Persian Gulf policy, emphasizing Iranian primacy. At the White House in 1973, the warmth of the welcomes reflected the depth of the friendship. In 1979, the former president traveled to Mexico, to Cuernavaca, to confer and console with the exiled and ailing Shah. He made notes for his meeting with reporters. "I look forward to paying my respects to the Shah, a personal friend for over 25 years and a friend of US for over 30 years. As we see the agony of Iran, we realize importance of standing by our friends. If we don't, we will end up with no friends." The next day, he made notes of his conversation with the Shah. The Shah does not refer to President Carter, does refer to fact. He was not well served by human rights activists in his administration, who by insisting on instant democracy in Iran, mortally weakened the Shah. He is depressed by what is happening to Iranian people. He is still knowledgeable, interested in world affairs.
I saw the Shah the last time in Mexico, at Cuernavaca, Mexico. He was then in the last phases of terminal cancer, although he would never admit it or talk about his own problems at all. But he was quite thin and quite pale. But his head still as active and sharp as it had always been. He's a very intelligent, introspective man. What happened to the Shah, I think, could only be interpreted in that part of the world and other parts of the world as well, is that it is dangerous to be a friend of the United States, and it may pay to be an enemy. I think what we have to understand is that the Shah was the best friend of the United States in that area, in the whole Persian Gulf area, and it was Israel's only friend. The Shah, we must remember, in the 1973 war, furnished oil for our Mediterranean fleet when the other countries in the area had cut it off. And the Shah tied down the Iraqi forces by supporting the Kurds against the Iraqis so that they never got involved in the 73 war.
A year later, he made a sad and lonely pilgrimage to Cairo to attend the Shah's funeral. At the airport, he gave reporters a personal and historical perspective.
There's no question that the Shah leaving Iran is a tragedy, a personal tragedy for him, a tragedy for the people of Iran who now are suffering repression much greater than they had before, who have 4 million at least unemployed, runaway inflation, under a government that is not really a government, it's really a mob. All these things have happened, but also it was, in addition to being a personal tragedy for the Shah, a tragedy for the people of Iran, it was certainly a tragedy for what we call the West, because what was leadership and stability in that part of the world is now replaced by instability.
The next day, he marched alongside the Shah Banu and the Crown Prince in the Shah's funeral procession through the streets of Cairo. The former president, now a private citizen, was the only American dignitary there. Several years later, he recalled that day and spoke about his friend.
When I was there, I was the only dignitary of any rank who came to the Shah's funeral, because here the Shah, who before everybody was bowing and scraping before him, the heads of state and government and so forth, because he was rich and powerful and so forth, and now they all avoided him because he was out of power. And I never forgot that as I was standing there in the big tent where all the VIPs, usually ambassadorial level, not head of state level, were standing, Sadat came walking in, resplendent in his uniform, general's uniform. He saw me, his eyes lit up, and he walked over, held both hands out, and he said, "How good of you to come, how good of you to come." And I said, "Mr. President, it was very courageous of you to receive the Shah after virtually every other country did not grant him sanctuary." And he said, "Courageous, sir? It isn't courageous to stand up for a friend."
Today, as events are unfolding in Iran and the Middle East, the long friendship and unique partnership between two remarkable men, Richard Nixon and Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, can provide an example of how true leadership can work to make a better and safer world. But more than instruction, they can be a source of vision and inspiration.
Thank you. You can see why the Nixon Library and Birthplace is the perfect location to have this conversation today. It is now my pleasure to introduce the moderator for this morning's panel discussion, Zohreh Mizrahi. She's the founder of the Persian American Civic Action Network. Thank you. Yes, Zohreh. Which she co-founded PACAN in 2019 to empower civic activism within the Iranian American community and to build bridges with like-minded organizations. Under her leadership, PACAN has led historic delegations, forged meaningful international partnerships, and has become an important voice for Iranian Americans. By profession, Zoreh is a partner and co-founder of Manesh and Mizrahi APLC, where she is widely respected as a leading immigration attorney in Southern California. We are deeply grateful to Zoreh and the entire PACAN team, our great partners and co-presenters today. They've helped make today possible. Thank you so much to our friends at PACAN. Now please join me in welcoming our panel. Thank you.
Nice to see you in person. Thank you. Dear Joe, I wanted to thank you for this warm introduction, especially your team at the Nixon Foundation for being so warm and so kindly receiving our invitation to partnership. Our idea was we want to talk about what's happening in America, especially celebrating the 250th anniversary of America's independence. And what better place to do that at the Nixon Library, because it has a lot of history, and it's the only president that stood by a friend in time of need. Both Chris, Joe, and their team accepted our invitation. Hence, we began working on this case, and this matter has been evolving since November of 2025. With the events unfolding in Iran, especially starting from December, when we had a group of Iranian civilians that took on the streets to speak up against the hyperinflation, the collapse of currency, and the deep hatred and resentment that they held towards the regime. As President Nixon said, this is not a government, it's a mob, it's a mafia, and it's a criminal group that has been reigning over Iran for the past 47 years. Unfortunately, on January 8th and 9th, we witnessed the deadliest massacre and brutalization of a group of unarmed protesters on the streets of Iran. The numbers have been escalating. It started with 32,000. And unfortunately, once the internet was shut down, we hear the numbers have grown to 45,000. My friends, these are not numbers, they are lives. There are innocent kids and children, some as young as 8-year-old, I'm sorry, and the oldest as 80 or 90 that went to the streets just to ask for the most fundamental rights. So if I may ask, before we start the panel, please all rise for a minute of silence, just in memory of the victims. Please be seated. Friends, it's true my distinct honor to welcome our panel here today. I'm grateful to each and every one of them for taking time out of their personal and professional life. Two of our friends are from the East Coast. They flew here just to be with us. And also Dr. Gerald Green, who drove all the way from Thousand Oaks, Agora Hills, in the heavy traffic of Los Angeles. I bet you it's easier to fly from the East Coast than drive from Thousand Oaks to Yorba Linda, I might say. So let me introduce our panelists. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Ms. Kimberly Reed. She was the president and chairwoman of EXIM, or Export-Import Bank of the United States, during Trump administration. She is currently a fellow at the Atlantic Council, working with Center for Democracy and Prosperity. Thank you so much for being here. And she is really as beautiful and as lovely as she appears on her website. Then I want to introduce to you my good friend. We actually grew up and went to the same schools back in Boston, Massachusetts, but different years. I had the pleasure of serving the Los Angeles Sheriff Department with Dr. Green back in the day when both of us were trying hard to be part of the reserve force of the department. He is a man of many talents. He was the former president of Pacific Council, where I had the pleasure of being part of the team. Now he's working as a global advisor for Cedars-Sinai, aside from working with UCLA, the Berkeley School of International Relations. Jerry, thank you for being here. I also have to share this story about Jerry. The days that I would be so tired and couldn't carry my target to the area, he was chivalrous enough to carry it for me. So thank you. Then I want to introduce someone that I've come to admire throughout the years. I'm one of the avid listeners of his interviews and programs. Our very own Behnam Ben Taleblu, who speaks beautiful Farsi and English. He is the senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, the Iran section. But the most important part of his activities is he's the foremost authority on Iran, Iran's history, and Iranian culture, explaining it the best way in English to the American media and also international media. With him at the helm of giving analysis to the rest of the organizations, media, and also think tanks, I foresee a better future for us, especially when it comes to US foreign policy. So Behnam, thank you for being here. It's truly an honor to have you. All right, Since Jerry Green needs to leave very soon, I'm going to start with him, and he is one of the most senior people at the table. Jerry, you lived in Iran back in 1978 when you were working on your thesis. And I know where you stand as far as political trajectory is concerned when it comes to Iran. But the issue that I have, and I want to give that little background about what Nixon said, what he had seen in the former Shah of Iran, our king, our Padshah, our monarch, the one that we revere all our life. He was the best friend of the United States. How would the US administrations, one after another, pivot to the other side and not stand by the Shah of Iran?
Well, let me thank you, Zora. And I'm the most senior, which means I'm the oldest, which is a charming euphemism for which I thank you. I've never been to the Nixon Library, and I feel really privileged to be here. My friend Robert O'Brien, I think, is the chair of the board. He was President Trump's national security. He is, and he's an LA guy and a really brilliant. We're very good friends, so I can say nothing but wonderful things about him. So thank you to the Nixon Library. I live near the Reagan Library. California is so diverse that imagine we have two wonderful such institutions. I also want to thank Zora for inviting me. I do not do a lot of public speaking. I am a boring analyst. I am happiest, sitting in my office reading things that nobody wants to be bothered with, and so I don't do a lot of public speaking. But Zora asks, I never say no. And I thought for an event like this, I might have something modest to contribute. I showed up in Iran in 1978 as a graduate student at the University of Chicago. My dissertation supervisor, Marvin Zonis, who some of you may know of, was supervising my work. And when I left Iran, Khomeini was back in power, and the Shah, I am so sorry, I got to turn this off, I apologize, was in exile. I lived in Amirabad. My office was in Tajrish at a think tank that was created by Reza Pahlavi, National Iranian Radio and TV, and my boss was Dr. Majid Tehranian. And I was driving my little Jian through the streets of Tehran, interviewing people and doing my dissertation research. I'm an educator. I'm an analyst. I am not a political person. I was the director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Arizona. I then directed the Middle East program at the Rand Corporation and wrote boring stuff on bunyads and the Pastoran and how do you negotiate with Iran and, stuff that nobody ever reads until it's too late. But the reason I mention this is that Zora asked me in 3 minutes to sort of assess US presidents, it's actually not that hard, in that it is my view that historically the United States, including the United States government, has never understood Iran, has never invested the effort necessary to understand Iran, has absolutely no sense of the complexity of Iran. I work on Israeli politics, Arab politics, Iranian politics, and Iranian politics is just in a class by itself in terms of its impenetrability, its complexity, its diversity. And what I remember well from Tehran is I was there during Cinema Rex, I was there during Jaleh Square, I was there during the major demonstrations on Tasu'a and Ashura. I mean, I saw a lot. And I was astounded at how the United States Embassy, which I dealt with remotely and rarely, didn't have a clue, They had absolutely no idea what was going on. They had this fantasy that Iran could sort of magically be turned into a Western-style, American-style democracy. And then as the revolution unfolded, and here I read about this retrospectively, provided the Shah absolutely no insight, no wisdom, no guidance, no support, and then, was astounded that the country fell apart. And then we moved to the subsequent phase, the search for the elusive moderate. The elusive moderate. A moderate in the Islamic Republic is an oxymoron. It's like jumbo shrimp. And for some reason, there's this view that we can find somebody whose allegiance and whose values are the same as ours, and then when we fail, we're surprised. And again, there's now an emphasis on regime change. Regime change sounds good, but Venezuela is not regime change. Talking to Castro in Cuba is not regime change. And when, Group A of thugs is replaced by Group B of thugs, it's the same regime with different people. It's not regime change. So and I'm going to end with this. Behnam, from whom you will hear, who's really an outstanding, we've never met, but I watch and read him regularly, and I'm deeply impressed by him. We belong to a mafia. We went to the University of Chicago, and the University of Chicago was actually the birthplace of modern Iranian studies. It really happened at the Persian language program was superb. There were historians, political scientists. And what I would say, given that I think we all share a belief and a commitment, a belief in the importance of Iran, a commitment to Iran rejoining the community of nations, the 93 million Iranians living with dignity, living with the same rights as everybody else, it starts with devoting some time to understanding Iran, paying attention to Iran, focusing on Iran. When you do it, the way it normally happens in this country is people pay attention when it's too late. I always describe my life as decades of benign neglect followed by moments of, of frenetic activity and sheer terror. Once you get to that point, it's too late. So what I'm being not political here, but I'm being very political here. I think as Iranian Americans, or like me, a Jewish American who spent a lot of time in Iran over the years, and subsequently, I've been to Iran 5 times after the revolution as well. This country needs to pay attention to Iran before it's too late. They need to understand it. Your kids, many of them probably want to understand where they came from, where they will return to visit someday, which I have no doubt that they will, to study Persian, history, culture. You can't manage a country where you don't know the language, where you don't know the culture, where you don't know the history, where you can't relate with people. And the Iranian people were told help is on the way. Sadly, I fear that's not the case. I fear it's not the case. So that's my plea. The boring analyst who, likes to write papers about bunyads, which are actually important and interesting, is recommending to all of us that we get our country, our universities, to pay attention to Iran. We're lucky to have Behnam because of the University of Chicago. And again, he's made the most of his education. Where we live here, this is Southern California, if not in Irangelous where. And you pay attention to, what's taught at the universities, there needs to be more. So let me end with that. And I also want to apologize. My wife has a serious back problem. I was able to get her, I work at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and I was able to get her an appointment with the leading back person, and I was assigned an appointment this afternoon. So when I get up and leave at 11 o'clock, Kimberly, Behnam, Zoreh, audience, I'm not making a political statement. I'm going to take care of the lovely Khanum Green, who is in a lot of discomfort. So thank you all for your patience. Thank you for staying the course. Thank you for caring about Iran. It's got to move beyond the emotional to the tactile. And the tactile is still at the universities. The Atlantic Council, by the way, which is a great institution about which I know a lot, as an Iran program, this country really needs to pay attention, and before it's too late. So thank you all very much, Zora. Thank you.
Benam, you want to offer any rebuttal to that?
The only rebuttal is my mother just discovered I'm in the mafia. So.
Thank you for that. For years, we heard of the news of economic sanctions against Iran or different Iranian apparatus, IRGC, MOIS, even naming the individuals. I want to focus on the issue of U.S.'s interest. Kim, you specifically reopened and you led the Exim Bank during Trump's first administration. And everybody knows the economic security equates or is equal to national security. Can you give us your take on this matter? How would you analyze this, and how would we come to terms with what's going on?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for putting together this panel. And I really want to say thank you to the Nixon Library. If you don't know Jim Byron, who is probably with the princess right now, just returned from a great leave of absence because he was leading our National Archives in Washington, D.C. So I'm sure we'll see him in a few minutes, but we really appreciate the library lending him to help our country as we celebrate our 250th anniversary. As you mentioned, Robert O'Brien was our national security advisor during the first Trump administration when I served as head of the Export-Import Bank of the United States. And he is now chair of this foundation and library, and he sends his regards. And I just wanted to summarize what he said on Larry Kudlow's show on April 18th. Robert stated, the U.S. strategy is maximum economic and diplomatic pressure on the Iranian regime. And so we know that takes many tools in the toolbox. Unfortunately, the Export-Import Bank, no way are we dealing with Iran right now because you are off cover under our country risk assessment system. So maybe someday we hope and pray that your sovereign risk rating and your credit worthiness and your political risk to our country and repayment reliability will completely change, and we will be trading partners in a great way. But right now, no way. But I also served in the Bush administration, George W. Bush administration. After 9/11, I worked as senior advisor to two Treasury secretaries, John Snow and then Hank Paulson. And many of you may not know this, but after 9/11, the Treasury secretary at the time, Paul O'Neill, pushed hard to make sure and got the Treasury Department on the National Security Council. That was really key to setting up a great framework for us. And Robert O'Brien and I did a lot together when I was leading Exim and he was at National Security Council because, as you say, economic security is national security. So Secretary O'Neill got Treasury into the National Security Council, and then Treasury Secretary John Snow really helped to set up this Office of Terrorism, Finance, and Intelligence, and tightening, creating tools to tighten Iran's financial networks. I recommend a book by our head of TFI at the time, Juan Zarate. It's a great book that explains the history of that. And so then Secretary Hank Paulson came in and started sanctioning those banks and targeted the IRGC. So we go from that. We know what sanctions, because we hear what President Trump says about the Obama and Biden terms and how they worked. And so here we are today. And we know that Iran's economy is just not an economic story, it's a national security story. And economic pressure should be judged by whether it constrains capability, not whether it changes rhetoric. So we need to distinguish, first of all, between the Iranian people, which we love, and the regime. So just yesterday, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced sanctions on 14 more individuals and entities through OFAC, dealing with aircraft as well that are based in Iran, Turkey, and the UAE. And obviously our goal is to disrupt the network. But with Iran, cash is capability. And the regime's access to money, shipping, and financial channels directly affects its ability to threaten the region, fund proxies, and repress its own people. So as we do these sanctions and we do the blockade, we know what President Trump feels, and I feel that although I'm not going to speak for him, he speaks very clearly for himself, but I think he's going to use these sanctioned funds as leverage, not as a concession to be handed over lightly. And I think that if there's to be any movement, it would be narrow, conditional, and heavily controlled. The strategic mistake would be to provide liquidity that the regime can repurpose faster than we can monitor it. So I think it's going to be later in the process that we would be lightening those sanctions.
Thank you. From what we've seen in the past 47 years, a group of mafia have taken over. They have gutted out the country. They have created chaos around the world, especially in the region. Whatever has remained of Iran was from the infrastructure that was made during the Pahlavi era. And I still don't understand why the rest of the world do not get it. We've been talking about the same facts and issues for years, but apparently people who have gone to Ivy League schools like Chicago University, Georgetown, or whatever, they do not see the facts as we see them. But now there is a war. People of Iran ask for America and Israel to intervene because they knew they could not fight these tyrants, this killing machine on their own. So, Behnam, I wanted to ask you, have the war reached its objective yet? Where do we stand? And where do you think Iranian people stand today when they were specifically told to stay home and not come out of their homes?
Thank you, Zohra. First of all, it's always a treat to be with PACAN and also at the Nixon Library. I actually came here with my girlfriend in December, so imagine this is a great date place. There's so much history here, so I highly recommend you guys check out the museum as well, but also if you have time, and again, you're an Iranian American interested in your history and you like the documentary that you just saw at the front of it, make an appointment with the archives. This isn't just the nerd in me speaking. You can discover a lot about how we got here, with a lot about the Nixon relationship and President Nixon's personal relationship with the late king of Iran. So there's a ton to do at this facility. So it's a real intellectual and personal and political honor to be here at the Nixon Library and share the stage with all of you. I mean, to your question, there's two really good questions there, which is about U.S. goals and the status of the Iranian people. Let me just say about the U.S. goals, this is kind of kaleidoscopic. You know, it is possible for President Trump to declare victory in this conflict against the regime three ways. There's the one way that we would like, which is, you either crater this regime or you facilitate its collapse or you facilitate major political change. But on this conflict, because it's a war, it's a shooting war, here are the three ways that are available to the president, and I think you might guess how he might declare victory. The three ways are, we call this one victory on points, that they say X% of the missile program, Y% of the drone program, X% of the defense industrial base, Y% of the export capacity of the regime has been cut, and therefore we have clipped the wings and kind of prevented this regime from, exporting the revolution or projecting power abroad. So when they talk about, for example, striking the Navy, this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to limit the impact of the regime beyond its borders. Number two is the one thing that you probably all know, particularly if you're Iranian Americans in the audience, that has really oriented and animated the interest of the West in Iran for the past 2 decades, and that's the nuclear program. In particular, what's the status of the highly enriched uranium that is now entombed under 2 or 3 different sites in Iran? Will the president bomb those sites again? Will he send special forces? What will be the status of what's left of Iran's nuclear program? That's another way available for the president to declare victory. And the third way is, unfortunately tied to energy and economics, because this was a war started over politics and security, but the regime's ability to turn it into a war over energy and economics, to spook markets on one hand, media on the other, is what has been restraining the president and constraining the president and limiting our options against this regime. And it's in that world, Kimberly was talking about the blockade, that the blockade enters. So can you flip the script on the Ayatollahs? If this is strategic leverage controlling the Strait of Hormuz by the Islamic Republic, well then it's going to become a strategic liability for them. So the question is, on which one of these 3 military vectors will the president declare victory on? I think it's impossible to do it without all of them, but I think you're seeing the president choose option 1 and option 3. But I think everybody here knows, and zooming out broadly, option 1 and option 3, so long as you leave a government like the Islamic Republic at the helm, option 1 and option 3 is like building a nice trophy and not having a shelf for it. It's going to drop. And it might even drop on the president's time in the next 2 years, or it will almost certainly drop in the next few administrations, particularly if you're looking at the direction of the debate over national security and foreign policy in the new Republican right and in the new progressive Democratic left, which is much less interested in doing these kind of things than ever before. So there's a real challenge here, is that President Trump, it was clear from the get-go, America and Israel will get a military victory against the Islamic Republic. That is very clear. But will they get a political victory? Can you take a military victory and nest it into a larger strategy that is consistent with your strategy and consistent with your value? And I mean, President Trump in term 1 made so much history against the Islamic Republic. In term 1, he broke the taboo. He slaughtered the sacred cow that used to exist in Washington. I was physically sitting there, I would see it, of even offering rhetorical or political support for the Iranian people. 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. Some of you may know the most seen tweet in the history of Persian language Twitter is President Trump's tweet from January 2020 supporting Iranian protesters. That's not by accident. Now the question is, will he deliver on it? Will he craft a strategy? Will he nest the use of military force into a strategy that is going to ultimately flip the script on these guys? Because my fear is, if you neuter and defang and decapitate this kind of mob or mafia regime, as President Nixon so rightly said, what will happen then is actually that which we fear the most. Because you push away from the table and you say, okay, I'm done, I'm content with a military victory, and you turn America's very limited time, America's very limited resources, America's very limited political capital elsewhere, and like Jerry was saying, you don't create the social base for America to care about this issue, to pay attention to this issue when it's boring, when it's less sexy, when it's less fun. Well, then what will have just happened inside Iran is you will have created the conditions for a regime that is too weak to project power abroad, but strong enough to kill unarmed protesters at home. And the Iraq example, which is like some crazy hangover which exists in Washington, D.C., will manifest itself, but not Iraq 2003, not a big, massive land invasion, but for some of you who remember, Iraq 91. And there is a great similarity coming our way, which means all of us have to stay focused and pay attention to this issue and make sure America doesn't prematurely declare a victory lap here. Because Iraq 91, compare it to now, anti-American regime, authoritarian regime, anti-Israeli regime, firing ballistic missiles at Israel, subject to UN sanctions, oil-rich, domestically economically poor, doesn't control its own airspace, pursuing WMD. The parallel is uncanny. And a regime like that was too weak to project power abroad came home and cracked skulls. And we all know what happened in Iraq, the most grotesque things in the 1990s, and that's the last thing that we want to see inside neighboring Iran, where many of us have ancestry from. So this is a combination of strategy and values to make sure the president lives up to everything that he said in the month of January, that he lives up to the maximum pressure policy that he architected back in term 1 and escalated in term 2, and actually supports the Iranian people, because there is no way out but through here. There is no Venezuela option. Ghalibaf is not Delcy Rodriguez. There is no premature victory lap here, because 47 years of the U.S.-Iran relationship tells you that, yes, you can manage a problem, and D.C. loves to manage a problem and come with ways to contain and roll back and all this stuff, but sometimes you have to wake up and realize the problem that you thought was being managed so long actually has been managing you. And that is precisely what the Islamic Republic, by not allowing us to focus on the Iranian people, by focus on nuclear and missile and military and drone and all of this stuff, this is the great distraction. And that is the great distraction that has come at the immense cost of the next part of Zohra's question, which is, it has come at the greatest cost to the Iranian people. Unless I can say, as a first-generation Iranian American, I care about this. But when I'm back in Washington, D.C., how do I talk about this? This is about foreign policy. This is about the most pro-American and the most pro-Israeli population in the heartland of the Muslim Middle East. So there is a line that people ascribe to Henry Kissinger that says foreign policy is not missionary work. I think I'm paraphrasing the line. This is not missionary work. This is not charity to care about this population. If you want to do what American voters have been trying to do since at least 2006 and do less in the region and not more, the only way through that is to support the Iranian people and to not make deals with this regime.
I love it. Thank you. Which is what I want you to talk about, Jerry, that we've seen one administration after another. When Reagan was running for office, he said he would not negotiate with terrorists. And we all witnessed how, after 200 plus US Marines were killed at the Marine barracks in Lebanon, instead of doing something about it, Reagan and his administration began negotiating with the Islamic Republic. We saw the same thing with Clinton, where Madeleine Albright apologized to Iranians for being behind a so-called coup against Mossadegh, a total false narrative as far as we are concerned about Iran's recent history. And then we talk about Bush the second, when the the US attack against Iran took place. The Islamic regime was responsible for the roadside bombings against the US military. And yet, our administration, especially with Condoleezza Rice, who was so anti the Islamic regime, they went into bed with the mullahs. They signed on deals that don't touch our soldiers. You're okay, you could do whatever you want. Let's put what Behnam said aside and let's say, okay, you know what? Our concern is not the Iranian population, Iranian masses. What about the American interests? What about the safety of Americans that want to travel on a US passport and they don't want to be taken hostage again? So how do we advise our administrations not to make false promises and failing to deliver it to their own voters, to their own constituents?
Well, you've got two Washingtonians here, and then me, who lives, the hippie who lives in LA. So I'm probably, not the right guy to ask, and you won't like the answer to the question. Washington hears what it wishes to hear. The challenge of democracy. Listening to Nixon on Iran, it was for me very interesting. I had not heard that. I knew pieces of it. I hadn't seen it. I did not know he was the only senior American to attend the funeral of the Shah, for example. And the problem here is every time you have a new presidential administration, we kind of start again. And everything is seen through the lens of domestic American politics, everything. So what's likely to happen there, it will benefit the Iranian people if it is believed to benefit the political establishment in Washington. And this is not just, it's the same with both parties. It's exactly the same thing. As an analyst, I'm used to sending, stuff forth and having it ignored because my policy recommendations may make very good sense, but if it doesn't align with the political objectives or the political ideals of the people in power, it's simply not going to be, they're not going to pay attention to it. And Kimberly and Behnam, they live in that world. I mean, that's why I don't live in Washington. I have never been part of the US government. I want, Robert O'Brien, my pal, when he was SPIHA, the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, Robert called me and asked me to help him with something Iran-related, and I believe I did. And for me, this was perfect. Let Robert live that life. I don't want to do it. I don't have the patience, the tact, the diplomacy. So you're right, Zora. It's unimaginable and it's frustrating, but that is the reality. And again, Behnam and Kimberly they live, this is their lives. So, they're the ones to actually show us, the pain in being right and having people not listen to them. What Behnam just said about Iran is absolutely spot on, 100% right, which is it should be about the 93 million people of Iran who were victims of a predatory, brutal, thuggish, cruel regime. At the end of the day, is that going to determine U.S. policy? And again, I'm going to have to excuse, this is awful.
Jerry, before you leave, let me ask you this question, and then 2 minutes later would be okay. And I already apologize to Madeline for taking you away from her. But what about the so many influential NGOs and the media that think that being against Trump, we are not here to discuss Trump, we are not here to grade him for anything, but I'm talking about US perspective, US national perspective. What is this message that we keep on hearing that people are against war? Why were these people quiet when 45,000 Iranians were massacred? Why didn't they speak up? Can you just make a reference to that double standard that exists in many of our NGOs and also so-called human rights organizations?
I understand the aphorism that he or she who ignores history is doomed to relive it. Having said that, living our lives in the rearview mirror is not necessarily going to promote the kind of change that we would like. It pains me to agree with you, and you're right, but to be much more cynical about where this will lead than perhaps, your question comes from a place of idealism. And I'm just a cynic. I've been a Middle East specialist for my entire adult life. And I always say that, we Middle East specialists are the oncologists of the international affairs world. We never have anything good to say. Things never turn out. We never have good news. So you're not wrong. You're right. But having said that, and this is going to sound political, and I don't mean it, Venezuela that's an attractive way to operate. You send in, Delta Force, you get rid of Thug A, you promote Thug B. Thug B is my thug, so therefore they're not a thug. you know, bim, bam, thank you, man, easy, it's done. We're talking to the Castros in Cuba. This is the easy way to do it. Anything that leaves the government of Iran in place is unacceptable. It is counter to our values as Americans, but it is operationally very, very challenging. Very, very challenging.
Yeah.
And that's why, you know, your question comes from a good place, and you're not wrong. I just, you know, that's why I'm happy in my little office all alone, because I never have good news about any of this stuff. I mean, I wish I did. But operationally, Kimberly and Behnam can answer your question better than I can. I am sure they went in to see people in Washington with, you know, the solution to a major problem and walked out astounded that it was not accepted. And take politics, you know, take Democrat, Republican, you take that stuff out of it and think about it systemically. Because systemically, both parties, I'm not an Iranian American, but I'm maybe an Iranian American groupie. Both parties have broken my heart repeatedly. Yeah. And as a result, I have a really hard heart. I'm going to have to excuse myself. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's very nice to meet you.
For years, we boycotted Atlantic Council because of Barbara Slavin. So I don't know if Jerry heard that or not. Okay. But I'm so happy to see you there, Kim. For years, U.S. administrations have sanctioned and they have frozen assets that have been considered to be part of the Islamic regime. And we've noticed in recent weeks, the regime representatives have been adamant asking about release of the frozen funds. Iranians believe those funds belongs to them, and it shouldn't go to the Islamic regime or its apparatus, and the funds should be invested to support the opposition. I know this is a difficult question to ask you, but based on your experience in leading a bank, making hard decisions, especially for a U.S. bank, I want to hear your take on this.
Again, President Trump watched what happened during the Obama administration and the Biden administration, and here we are today. So there's no way, I believe, that he's going to lessen the sanctions. It's going to be later on, and they've got to get a deal locked down. And just to even see Secretary Bessent do more sanctions yesterday, that is a signal. Obviously, the vice president's trip to Pakistan has been suspended, but I think there's a lot at play that we're not seeing right now in the news. And a lot is happening. And let's hope we get to a good negotiation in due course. But I don't think the president is going to repeat in any way what Joe Biden did. So he's going to be tough, tough, tough. Back to the NGO question. How many NGOs spoke out when those 45,000 Iranian citizens were murdered?
Not many.
I'm never going to forget that. And the ones that did, thank you. The Atlantic Council has this Center for Freedom and Prosperity. I'm a distinguished fellow there. And we do an index every year. And looking at the 2026 index, you look at prosperity and you look at freedom. And I think everyone in the world wants to be prosperous. And we're using the data to track those countries that are free and how that tracks with prosperity. And unfortunately, where does Iran rank in the 2026 index when it comes to freedom? 150 out of 164 countries. And so the citizens of Iran, the wonderful citizens of Iran, know this, but I hope that their awareness that with a more free country, you're going to get that prosperity as well. And I'm going to put it to our wonderful experts. I want to take a class from you, if I can audit. But I think this time is different, too, than before. In the first Trump administration with National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, we worked on the Abraham Accords and seeing these countries sign up for that. I think now that if we look at the countries of the Gulf state right now, what are they thinking and doing and supporting? And I think that is a totally different dynamic in a good way for freedom for the region for the future. It might take a lot of pain in a short amount of time, and that even includes consumers all around the world feeling the price at the gas pump. But I think we're gonna get there with persistence. Let me read something that President Nixon said during his visit to Iran back in May of 1972. Oil supply is vital to the free world. Therefore, your interest in oil and ours are bound intimately together. The consuming countries need a secure source of oil, and the producing countries have every right to expect a fair income. So as we look at prosperity and freedom, he was so wise. We have President Nixon's grandson with us, Christopher Nixon Cox. I know he'll share more perspectives on that, but we just hope and pray for a free Iran as soon as possible.
Thank you. Behnam, I want to continue on where you stopped, which is about the mentality of the regime. The Iranian masses understand this regime really well, that it plays the waiting game as they did with Trump and his first term. And unfortunately, our own Secretary of State was the one who mentored Zarif not to do anything and wait until Trump's term was over, and he was so sure that another Democrat would be in the office. But I want to go back to what's happening in Iran today. We have a regime that, despite the sanctions, especially IRGC, has entrenched itself so deep within the fabric of society, in every aspect of people's lives. How can the Iranian people be able to prevail and come up victorious out of this, now that they know two incredible friends are standing by them, one more so than the other, and that is Israel, that is willing to say that they want the end of the regime. They want a regime change. America is more hesitant. America is more reserved because of its history, its foreign policy, and that they don't want to be instrumental in bringing down the regime. But what would be the proper message to people inside Iran about how they should pursue the collapse of this regime, hence the political victory you were talking about to be handed to America and Israel?
Well, I think it's an excellent question, but we need to zoom out a little bit. And again, not to keep going back to the documentary and show how much of a nerd I am, but there was a real gem that the late Shah said in that documentary, and it was a criticism, where he said, instant democracy. You know, we're not, especially if you're looking at the street in Iran and the many, many year battle between the street and the state in Iran, it is not going to be instant results, and it's not going to be instant gratification for those of us who obviously want a better government in Tehran that finally can reflect the views, values, and wishes of the Iranian population. So that is a process that the Iranian people know better than all of us that is going to take time. And you see it in the evolution already. You know, sometimes I don't think it should be about the messaging, because I don't want to get ahead of one president, or I don't want to get behind one prime minister. It's not worth it to play that political game. The Iranian people themselves will be the best judge of when to come out again. And exiled opposition obviously will play a role in that, but they will be the best judge based on local conditions. You all know better than I that Iran had 1,000,001 Mahsa Aminis who were abused and harassed and beaten just for improperly wearing the hijab. But why this Mahsa in September 2022? How did she be able to trigger a nationwide anti-regime uprising? So again, it's much more internal, it's much more art than science as to what is the next time that when Iranians will come out. And it's a question of when, not if. For one, so when you're speaking with policymakers, it's not if the Iranian people will come out again, it's when they will come out again, what will Washington and Israel do about it? That's the first frame. To make sure that they know that this is the history of this country, 47 years of an Islamic Republic. There's been 47 years of various kinds of protest against the Islamic Republic. And in particular, in the past 10 years, the zeitgeist, the spirit has moved away from reform and entirely towards revolution and changing the system as a whole. So that's one thing Washington needs to know. Number two is, what principle should Washington and Jerusalem operate under? The principle is, number one, do no harm. Kind of like, you mentioned oncology, kind of like the way a doctor approaches a patient. You are trying to build something. Unlike all of America's experiences in this part of the world, you know, limited, covert, overt, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Syria to Libya, Iran is different because fundamentally in Iran you have a society that is already on your side. Unlike Iraq and Afghanistan, America and the military doesn't need to socially engineer a pro-American population. You have it. The charge we all have to give to policymakers back in DC is, how do you make sure the things you do, the targets you sanction, the targets you hit, the political speeches you give, how do you make sure that you keep the Iranian people on your side rather than lose them? That's a fundamentally different thing. Not how do you work to get, how do you hold them in the spot that they naturally already are? And then I think number three, zooming out, be ready for what comes. I think someone like me, who we are where we are, particularly so many Iranians I know have been so anti-regime but also so anti-conflict, but after they saw what happened in December, after they saw what happened in January, so many Iranians, normal Iranian Americans, filled the airwaves in January and February calling for the intervention because they saw the playing field was uneven. And the one thing that can level the playing field is indeed military power. But it's not military power against the regime's missile program or nuclear program. It is military power against the repressive apparatus, against the IRGC, the Basij paramilitary, the law enforcement forces, and even the foreign paramilitaries. It would have been the easiest thing for America, who still strikes targets in Iraq and still cares about the safety and security of Iraq, to prevent Iraqi Shia militias from coming across the border. But that was not something that was done. And that is something I am going to be looking for, and I am going to be pushing for, and we all, I think, should be pushing for, to say, why would you let armed terrorists, CNN reported it, not me, not FDD, 4 different Iraqi militias cross the border from Iraq into Iran in the month of January. 3 of them are designated foreign terrorist organizations with American blood on our hands. Why did we sit there and watch that? That didn't require going in and having a missile war against the Islamic Republic. That could have been pinprick stuff inside Iran. So to me, it's not about the message, it's about the action. It's what will America and Israel do? And if the conflict resumes, the targets that America and Israel go after will give the cues to the population to stay at home and sit it out, or will give the cues to following us, you guys go in. You guys saw the graffiti. I think it was in 2024, if I'm not mistaken, when the war with Israel and Iran started in a very limited sense with those missile strikes.
2025.
24, April and October, the 2 strikes. It was April, and then it was October, and then 2025 was the 12-day war. But the graffiti was, Israel, the first strike is yours, the last strike is ours.
Yes.
How do we get back into that position? And so long as we focus on, oh, we're disarming the missiles or defanging this, and we don't have a ground game, and we don't remind people in Washington and Israel and around the world that the Iranian people have already sacrificed, we're going to be continuing to have this conversation again with one another. I'll tell you what one brave Iranian said over the phone to me, because obviously the internet is closed for 54 days now, and you had 3 weeks shut down in January. They said, we are ready for sacrifice. We are not ready for suicide. They are ready for sacrifice, not suicide. And I think this is the message we have to take back to policymakers in DC, that they are ready, but you also have to do your part. And again, I will say this for the millionth time. I focus on security and guns and bombs and all these things, but striking the missile program does nothing for your average protester in Tehran or Mashhad or Tabriz or Isfahan. But striking a local Basij base, or doing what the Israelis did, which is to go after the Basij in the tents that they were in after the base that was hit, that does a lot. So if you are an Iranian protester, the targets are your cues, not the messages.
Thank you. Kimberly, I just want to ask you this question, and that's if you are comfortable to answer. Do you think the history would judge Trump and Netanyahu as villains or as heroes?
I think for President Trump, a hero. You need to look at the successes that have happened. There's so much Trump derangement syndrome that people can't see the forest for the trees. He has strategies. Even we saw on Easter Sunday, that was a strategy, that tweet, to get the Iranians to the negotiating table. So he thinks about things in long-term perspective. And if you just chalk up how different the world is in the way of peace and freedom and what you need to do to get there, I don't know anyone else that would have the guts to do what has been done. I really, when you look at so many people in the world right now, and I'm around foreign leaders, and on a variety of fronts, you kind of hear and feel the reaction of, yeah, that was a good thing in the end. So I think that he will be a hero, and the Iranian people, I pray, will be free, and look forward to hopefully celebrating that with you.
Thank you, as we do. I will open up the panel to Q&A from our guests, but I want to ask one final question from Behnam, which I think some of you may find it very interesting. In a recent interview, and I quote, Behnam said he thought that the Congressional Act to declare war was, in his opinion, was considered unconstitutional. And he ended the sentence by saying, CC Nixon. So I want to hear from you, what were you thinking? Why would you think that that declaration or article is considered unconstitutional?
So I don't want to take off everyone's time here because I'm certainly not a lawyer, but I am a history nerd, I am a foreign policy nerd, and I am interested very much in the success of American foreign policy. And success, what stops success? I think as President Nixon said many years ago, North Vietnam cannot defeat the United States, only Americans can do that. So today, Khamenei Jr. cannot defeat the United States, only Americans, when we fight each other so vitriolically online or in real life, that is what happens. And yes, there are real congressional constitutional checks on executive power. I believe that the War Powers Act, which is the bill that you mentioned, which is the law of the land, it has not been struck down. I personally believe that it is unconstitutional because it excessively, and I'm not a lawyer, but it's just someone looking at history and interested in strategy, history, strategy, results. I believe that even though, yes, the Article 1 branch of Congress, the Article 2 is the executive, but because the executive in this country is the commander-in-chief, and people like President Nixon knew that really well, by the way, because he's the commander-in-chief, or he or she, hopefully in the future, the commander-in-chief, I think the War Powers Act is a bit excessive in the regulation. That doesn't mean that there is no advise and consent role. That doesn't mean that in general you shouldn't have regular briefings, not just the Gang of Eight, but really across committees between what the president is saying. But I think looking back over the past 60 years, warfare has changed. And I think our regulatory framework to make sure that the way this country, which is a democracy, engages in conflict also has to be updated. You know, there is a reason, it's not just the adversary, there is a reason why we haven't had America's had a lot of conflicts since World War II, but we haven't had a formal surrender like Japan after the end of World War II. The adversary has changed, conflicts have changed, the laws need to be updated to reflect the new nature of conflict. And yes, it has to be 110% democratic, transparent, and representative, but I do think the War Powers Act came out of the debacle that was the Vietnam War, and I do think sometimes is selectively wielded now for political purposes from the left and the right. And when you look at presidents of the left and the right, starting in the late 90s with the limited interventions and going up until now, have ignored or downplayed or not lived up to all of this, I think it's a figment of our imagination to say that this law is working exactly as it needs to, and that the American executive's relationship with military force is working exactly as it needs to. So I said that in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way, and I'm not a lawyer, so please, I know there's probably many more qualified legal minds in the room, but I do think we have to, our laws have to reflect the nature of warfare today, and I wouldn't want any kind of excessive control of any branch of government from one against the other.
Makes sense. Thank you. Friends, Chris is standing right here. Okay. If you have a question, please stand up, give your name, and
Yeah, I got lucky, and one's right here in front of me. We have a limited amount of time for a couple of questions, so I'll moderate it. I saw this is the first hand. I see one over here to my right. I'll go to next, but questions, or what are you?
Thank you so very much for the panel. I'm Nikon. This question goes for Ben. How do you convince the American people when inflation is going so high, cost of goods are high, oil prices are high, now to sacrifice American troops to go overseas? And how do we respond as the Iranian American community to that criticism?
I'll be brief, and also, again, the real financial mind is to my right here. But one, I would say, is that I would empathize with it. Number one, I do empathize with it. We're all citizens, we're all taxpayers, we all go to the pump, we all vote. This war affects all of us. But a country like the Islamic Republic, with its hand over something like the Strait of Hormuz now, that will affect all of us more so later. They haven't discovered this, but they've realized that they could wield it more cleverly than ever before. So to think that if we push away from the table, these terrorists are going to take their foot off the gas, that is a mistake. So we're going to be paying for this, whether we like it or not. We better do it right. Number two is to remind Americans, particularly middle Americans, particularly Americans from Appalachia, particularly Americans of immigrant backgrounds who have served in the armed forces, that the real measure of this fight against the Islamic Republic is the measure in blood, not in dollars. And this regime is the regime that has killed more Americans than ever before and is still standing. And in this most recent iteration of conflict, 13 U.S. service persons have died. That is 13 way too many, but in Reagan's conflict with Grenada, 19 died. And the Islamic Republic is 1,000,000 times stronger and more lethal than Grenada. So we have to remind Americans that the real cost is the cost that we have paid already in terms of blood, this regime killing Americans. And then two, showing how effective we have been. That's what I would say.
Can I add on to that? How expensive is it if a nuclear bomb goes off in some part of the world? And what would that do? And the president watched closely the level of enrichment increasing and obviously was briefed and was very concerned about American safety and brought about where we are today. So that is the ultimate cost. And I think that Gas is high now, but when we get to a good result in negotiations, I think you'll see it decrease.
Great question, great answer. Thank you. You, sir, what is your question?
My name is Arash. I'm a congressional reporter. This question is for Ben. During the past couple of weeks... I should pass it to... Right. Well, during the past couple of weeks in Congress, I've witnessed Mujahideen Khalq having a gathering, and after gathering, talking to different congressional offices. I've been told that at least 30 members of Congress are considering helping Mujahideen Khalq to the amount of $150 million for regime change. And when I asked their offices why the congressmen or the senators are considering helping an organization that has the blood of Americans on its hands, they said, well, nobody else is asking us. This is the only organization that is asking for money for regime change. Do you think the monarchists or all the groups that are working for a better Iran, secular Iran, democratic Iran, what Shah Reza Pahlavi is actually looking for, do you think they need to have a more presence in Congress as far as having maybe a permanent office to be able to talk to members of Congress? Thank you.
Thank you, Arsh. It's a great question because I've been on the Hill quite a lot in my almost 19 years in DC, almost 14 years with FDD, listening, learning. I was literally testifying before Congress yesterday, and you are right that the MEK does have a strong presence there. And what I've always seen is that the money goes the opposite way. They tend to be able to draw big crowds because they pay people. So this is the first I hear that they're asking for money. And one reason that the other elements of the Iranian opposition, in particular more of the pro-Pahlavi camp, has been, I think, more noble in its engagement with the Hill is that the bills that they're supporting in terms of internet freedom, even in terms of asset freezes, those are all things that don't cost the taxpayers anything. Those are all things that if you did the asset forfeiture, hypothetically, Trump has a blockade now. The blockade is designed to stop Iranian boats, oil tankers from docking in Iranian ports, taking Iranian oil out. If you take those ships, if you confiscate them, and you take that oil back into Texas and you sell it at market price, and rather than pay off some legal fee, or rather than pay off a small portion of the US debt, or rather than pay part of the OFAC budget, you create a dollar account for the Iranian opposition, which, by the way, is something that, you know, our friends at Nufti, for example, have been asking for a long time. FDD has been talking about this. Many have been talking about this. There hasn't been the political will for this. But this is actually something that is a net positive for the taxpayer. So this is the MEK asking for money I have never heard of. Best to ask the question to them. But these are guys who pay to play. And because we're at the Nixon Library, we have to say this. The MEK started as a terror group designed to actually bomb when Americans would come for these high-level meetings, like with the late Shah in Tehran back in the day. I think anyone who is interested in securing the future and safety of American service persons needs to remember that history. But as someone who is always interested in having the community behind them and is interested in policy, it's not just a congressional office. I think everybody needs to do this. I think the Iranian American community needs more days on the Hill and less days in California. You know, this is a campaign, not an operation. One trip is not enough. It has to be thought about systematically, because this is the fundamental difference of America. It is an open book, and it is on you to organize. It is on you to spend. It is on you to stay in the fight. And 1, 2, 3, 4 defeats is not going to be enough to to hang up your hat and say, we tried.
I'll just add to that. And Zora, you probably have some good thoughts on this as well, given your organization. But I worked on Capitol Hill as a lawyer for 3 committees for 7 years at the start of my career. And it takes visits from every interest group to the Hill, because if there's silence, there can be decisions made based on the information presented to them. I know that Secretary Rubio and President Trump are aware of all of the different groups and the powers that may be, but when you have a newly elected member of Congress, you need to be educating them and their staff, who are sometimes new to Washington and to the topic. And so that takes, as you said, having a presence. Also, it's great that you're testifying. Having groups like the Nixon Library host events like this, where we talk about the topic, but also the think tanks in Washington. Be sure you're plugged into those, creating awareness, creating information, and speaking. Again, because if only one or two sides instead of five sides are heard, uninformed folks may take action without full awareness. So I think that's...
Kim, we noticed more resistance from the current administration, especially Department of State, than we did during Trump's first term. I remember we traveled to Washington, D.C. a few times. We met with Brian Hook and many people in the Department of State. I think Rubio has been extremely busy. He has not had time to be able to sort of open the doors to us, but we are trying. And with you here and also Christopher Cox here, we are hoping our message will reach their ears. And I know we are running out of time. I just want to give a few thank yous and acknowledgements. First of all, to the light of our future, Princess Noor. Thank you for being here today. We are truly honored. You need to say Javid Malake, okay? So there is time for change. We are grateful to Javid. I also want to thank Shala and Scott O'Neill for being our benefactor for today's event. I definitely want to thank Mr. Parvaneh, Laura Yunai, and many other friends, especially in the Farsi-speaking media, who did not hesitate to offer help. Mr. Zokai, Mr. Shajare, our little dynamite Asal Pahlavan, who's there all the time. I also want to thank City Councilman John Mirish for being here today. Thank you, John. My commander from Los Angeles County Sheriff Department, who's his second visit to Nixon through an event arranged by PACAN. So thank you very much, sir. I specifically want to thank my brothers and sisters in PACAN. I put you through the grinder. We worked very hard. And through them, we were able to make this a success. I'm also grateful to Mr. and Mrs. Gaboy for their very generous donation. Also, Mona and Darius Sufer, and thank you for gracing us today. Mr. Ardakani, thank you for being here today. It's truly a pleasure. And my friends, I have Ambassador Michal Postal and his beautiful wife Fariba here. We have many friends here who have been very supportive of our events. Remember, this is a volunteer organization. Our idea is to empower Iranian civic activism. And that's what we mean by activism, that we all need to hold each other's hands and be able to make a difference. I want to acknowledge Christopher Nixon Cox for being here today, Frank Gannon, And more specifically, I'm grateful to Benam for being here today, and you, Kimberly. You were incredible. And again, as I said, you're beautiful in heart and beautiful in face, and it was a true pleasure to have you here. And if I have missed any names, blame it on my age and a long morning, but I'm very excited and I'm very pleased to be here. And again, thank you, Chris, Reina, Joe, Chris, Nazim, and everybody who helped us through this program, and also our Parmis. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the show does not stop there. We're going to take a quick break and then transition this room for lunch. So grab a cup of coffee, use the restroom, and we'll be back here in just a short break of about 10 minutes to keep moving forward with some more highlights. Thank you.
All right, everyone, I hope you're enjoying your lunch here this evening or this afternoon and the great conversation. And we're honored now to watch a special message from a key player in the Middle East today. This message was filmed at the United States Embassy in Jerusalem. This man is a great friend of the Nixon Foundation and a steadfast voice for peace and freedom. Please see this message from Ambassador Mike Huckabee, U.S. Ambassador to Israel.
My only disappointment in being part of this event is that I can't be there in person. I've been to pretty much every one of the presidential libraries, and they're all inspiring and unique reflections of those who have held the highest office in the land. But I tell people regularly that perhaps my favorite is the Nixon Library, and not just because I'm speaking to you today. No, it's largely due to a combination of an extraordinarily well-planned facility that masterfully tells the story of how a young, impoverished kid could rise to become president, and in so doing, change the world. But I also add that it's the warm and memorable hospitality of the docents who make every guest feel like a family member that they actually want to have over for dinner. My visits here have been always cherished times, and then maybe there's the personal connection that dates back to my serving as the South Arkansas Youth Coordinator for the Nixon re-election campaign all the way back in 1972. I have no doubt but that I probably put him over the top that year. Well, I come to you today from 7,500 miles away from the heart of the Holy Land of Jerusalem, the indigenous, ancient, and forever capital of the Jewish people. People with a history dating back to Abraham on Mount Moriah, and later the city of King David and the first and second temples. Lately, I've had a front row seat to an incredible chapter of world history. I've been ambassador to Israel for just over a year, and already I've been through 5 wars, a hostage release, dodging ballistic missiles the size of 18-wheel trucks, as well as rockets from Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. I've spent far more time rushing to the bomb shelters than I ever could have imagined. In fact, I've had more than a front row seat. I've lived in the bullseye. And when I ask people to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, it's a lot more than quoting a verse from the Psalms or some obligatory rhetorical flourish. No, I really mean it. My first trip to Israel was in the summer of 1973. I was just out of high school, preparing to do something that no male in my family had ever done, and that's go to college. In fact, no male upstream from me, as far back as the 1700s, had ever graduated high school. Now, I would be there in Israel just before the Yom Kippur War, although I certainly didn't know that was coming. Unfortunately, neither did Israel, and the surprise attack from Egypt and Syria nearly was the end for the tiny little nation that had faced threats to its existence since it was reconstituted in 1948 after 2,000 years of exile from their homeland. Had it not been for President Nixon providing a crucial resupply of military assistance to Israel, there might not have been an Israel for me to deploy to as ambassador. His actions were a key reason that Israel survived the threat. Since that time, I've traveled with Israel over 100 times before being sent by President Trump to serve as the United States ambassador to the State of Israel. I will forever be grateful for that privilege. Now, the 3 most consequential presidents in the life of Israel were Harry Truman, who recognized Israel 11 minutes after it declared its independence in 1948, Donald Trump, who moved our U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and who recognized Jerusalem as the capital, as well as the Golan Heights as sovereign Israel land. and whose actions in Operation Midnight Hammer in 2025 and Operation Epic Thunder this year proved to be monumental in putting an end to Iran's 47-year obsession with destruction of both Israel and the United States. And then it was Richard Nixon who answered the urgent call of Prime Minister Golda Meir asking for military hardware and munitions. Far too many Americans have never fully grasped the threat that the Iranian regime has posed to us in the United States for the past 47 years. Their ambition was not just to obtain a nuclear weapon, but to use it. They have sung the same tiresome song all these 47 years, death to Israel and death to America. Enmity was not always existent between Iran and the U.S. and Israel. Under the Shah, Iran had developed from a land where 85% of the population were illiterate and only 1% of the population owned land, to an Iran which had become the crown jewel of a restored Persian culture. I do remember the Iran before the Ayatollah. And I remember that while the Ayatollah was in France and then the Shah was deposed, the Ayatollah led a radical Shiite revolution. And in short order, the extremist Islamists rolled back the clock and the calendar hundreds of years to a more primitive and authoritarian, hard-fisted rule. After storming the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, the Revolutionary Guard took 50 diplomats hostage and held them for 444 days. It was a humiliating spectacle for America to be brought to its knees by a group of religious fanatics. And until President Trump, America appeased and tiptoed around the threats and the actions of Iran and its proxies spread all over the world. The Iran under the Shah wasn't perfect, but it had become a model of forward-leaning modernity. The Persian pride was on full display, and Iran led the region and a lot of the world in fashion, art, medicine, education, and prosperity. It was vibrant, alive, and growing. President Nixon had become a close and personal friend to the Shah during their comparable days of rising in influence and power, in a bond that, frankly, transcended their terms of office and even into private life. During the Shah's reign, women achieved full political rights, people were able to buy land, and Tehran was a global nerve center for cutting-edge technology, science, and medicine. Over 40,000 young Iranians had gone abroad to study, but instead of appreciating the progress, many of those students came back thinking that they would push for greater democracy. And they joined the revolution, believing that the radical clerics would usher in a new level of freedom and empowerment. Like idealistic but utterly misguided young but ignorant students in the U.S. who march in our streets carrying pro-Hamas banners and shouting from the river to the sea, they failed to see how radical Islam would strip women of their political freedom, force them out of their cosmopolitan fashions to be hidden in burqas, and create a climate of fear, intimidation, and repression. Like the useful idiots on American campuses who wear shirts saying "Queers for Palestine," but in their ignorance fail to realize that homosexuality is punishable by death under the regime. This is so very, just insane. And as if history has repeated itself, the French hid and housed Ayatollah Khomeini until he returned to take control of the country. Some people and nations, well, they never learn. As we lean forward, we now hope for a new future for the people of Iran. It would be remarkable if the current ceasefire can become a full-force peace agreement, and that Iran would someday have normalized relations with Israel
and behave as a nation state instead of a terror organization. I would love to lead a delegation from Jerusalem to Tehran to commemorate a fresh start in this part of the world. What President Trump has set in motion is not just a realignment of the Middle East, but frankly, it's a realignment of the whole world. His actions have sent a clear and vital message to friend and foe alike. America's allies can trust us, but our adversaries had best fear us. Empty words and strongly worded letters shuffled through the paperwork as what has become an increasingly and useless United Nations, stabilizing nothing and destabilizing pretty much everything. Some things, well, they get better with age. Beef, wine, and cheese, because they need time to mature. A fine guitar will sound better because the wood seasons and its tone begins to match the craftsmanship of the luthiers who built it in that way. But the predictions and the clarity of President Nixon in understanding the world, perhaps like no other president, is a reminder why this treasured campus has become more relevant and valuable today than ever. And 53 years after my first trip to Israel, and 54 years after working to help President Nixon get reelected, I'm more proud than ever to have undoubtedly helped put him over the top.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Parmiss Kativi, and it is truly a pleasure to see so many familiar faces and many new ones gathered here today. I'd like to begin by thanking Ambassador Huckabee for his thoughtful and deeply insightful remarks. His reflections echoed a warning President Nixon made nearly half a century ago, that in the absence of stability in Iran, the region could face economic decline, political repression, and widespread instability. Sadly, that foresight has proven all too accurate. I also want to take a moment to echo the sentiments of Ambassador Huckabee about the extraordinary docents in this library. Every interaction I've had with them over the past many years has been marked by warmth, generosity, and a remarkable depth of knowledge about American history and civics. So thank you to our docents for the vital role that they play in educating and inspiring all who walk through these doors. And speaking of civics, today, civic understanding in the United States is at a historic low. Only 22% of 8th graders are proficient in civics. The implications of this are profound. A generation that may feel disconnected from how government functions and uncertain how to express their voices. This is precisely why the Nixon Civics Academy is so critical at this moment. Its mission to educate and inspire the next generation to lead with knowledge, integrity, and purpose has never been more urgent. If you are interested in learning and supporting the mission of the Nixon Civics Academy, please reach out to the Nixon team here to see how you can get involved. Thank you. Now it's my distinct honor to introduce our panelists for today's keynote luncheon conversation. After a brief introduction, I will invite them to join me on stage. First, it's especially meaningful to welcome Princess Noor today. The Nixon Foundation has had the honor of hosting 3 generations of the Pahlavi family. Her grandmother, Empress Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and her father, Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, were both recipients of the Nixon Foundation's Architect of Peace Award. Today, we are truly delighted to continue that legacy by welcoming Princess Noor. Noor is a human rights advocate, investor, and partner at Sofra Capital. She's also an advisor to Acumen, a global social impact organization focusing on addressing poverty through sustainable investment. As the granddaughter of the late Shah of Iran and the daughter of Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, Noor has emerged as a leading voice for human rights, civic freedom, and democratic change in Iran. She has been actively engaged in raising international awareness around the ongoing struggle of the Iranian people and advocating for a future grounded in dignity, pluralism, and rule of law. Noor works closely alongside her father in advancing a vision for a free and democratic Iran, including contributing to the development and global engagement efforts of the Iran Prosperity Project, a comprehensive, expert-driven blueprint designed to guide Iran's peaceful transition and reconstruction following the end of the Islamic regime. Alongside her advocacy, Noor brings a professional background in the financial markets, investor relations, and strategic advisory, working at the intersection of capital, innovation, and impact. Her work reflects a commitment to aligning economic development with human dignity and long-term societal progress. Noor holds a BA from Georgetown University and MBA from Columbia Business School. Next, Christopher Nixon Cox. Christopher Nixon Cox brings both a personal and professional perspective to today's discussion. As a member of the Richard Nixon Foundation's Board of Directors and CEO of LightSwitch Capital, he operates at the intersection of leadership, investment, and global strategy. As the grandson of President Nixon and the son of Tricia Nixon Cox and Edward Cox, he carries forward a unique legacy, one that he has translated into a thoughtful commitment to public discourse, civic engagement, and preserving historical understanding. His work reflects a deep appreciation for the enduring relevance of leadership, diplomacy, and informed citizenship in today's rapidly changing world. And finally, Frank Gannon. Frank offers a rare and deeply personal perspective on the Nixon presidency. As a special assistant to the president, he served at the center of decision-making during one of the most consequential periods in modern American history. Following President Nixon's time in office, Mr. Gannon worked closely with him, playing an integral role in researching, organizing, and shaping RN, the Memoirs of Richard Nixon. His firsthand insight into President Nixon's thinking, leadership, and legacy provides an invaluable historical lens, one grounded not only in scholarship, but also in direct experience. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists to stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and is this working? Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for being here. It's a great honor and pleasure to have both of you. We're going to begin by just sort of, although Parmis has really done it very well, asking you to sort of bring us up to date with you today. We're going to begin with a couple of slides for each of you that will charm us and may embarrass you. Let's begin with Noor. So, just some family pictures. The beginning of a geostrategist.
I can't see these pictures, so I'm just going to wait for your reactions if it's if it's me as a 10-year-old.
And the only thing I was thinking about, I have written in my book also, is to have my albums with the picture of the family. I remember one of the persons at the court tell me, why don't you take these paintings or miniatures? I said, all I have is for Iran. For Iran is not for me.
Tell her what clothing you brought with you.
You know, all the Iranian clothes that I spoke about, I left it in Iran because they were beautiful.
But she brought her jean shorts. Those couldn't be left behind.
So tell us if what you want about what you're doing today, but what's it like to be a young person in 2026 as part of such a historic family and with such a tradition behind you?
Yeah, I think in my family it's never really been a question whether or not you step up to help serve something greater than yourself. And the legacy, I grew up knowing that it was, one of modernity, progress, love of country, effort to make the country prosper, and to make Iran a power that can compete on the global stage. But if I'm honest, in America growing up, there was so much misinformation around my family at the beginning as I was growing up. And I kind of, I kept my head down while my dad worked hard, often such an uphill battle on his own. And I wondered, why? Because there's been so much pain, there's been so much suffering, he could have done anything. And then social media came around, and a direct line suddenly became established between me and the people inside Iran who were just reaching out in the masses, asking for help, telling us what's happening inside, looking to my dad for guidance, and it suddenly became very real that he's needed and that people see through all of the misinformation, and that Iranians inside either lived through that time and were expressing so much pain and regret, but also the new generation who somehow just understood him and saw that they could trust him and were reaching out to us as their peers, me and my sisters, to be their voice. So there really wasn't a question whether or not to step up and try to amplify that. And I really try to do my best, humbly to do so in whatever way that I can. But yeah, that's really how I choose. I hope to uphold the legacy, and also through the Iran Prosperity Project to help get Iran back on track and rapidly hit the ground running to rebuild. I think that those are, the main ways that I'm trying to channel the efforts right now.
Chris, your turn.
Well, I just...
Can you?
Yeah, no, I can thank goodness there were no pictures of me when I'm 10. I'm permanently memorialized in my awkward 10-year-old phase.
You were adorable then, and you're no less so now.
It's so wonderful to be here today with all of you. I just want to relay just one really quick story. My family and the Shah's family and Iran are so intertwined. And I just want to give you a little example of this. I knew that there was a Shah before I knew that my grandfather was president of the United States. I remember from a very young age, Ambassador Zahedi, probably many of you in the room know Ambassador Zahedi, who is the ambassador to the United States, when my grandfather was president and afterwards. I would remember when he would send gifts to us for Christmas. So then my mother explained to me a little bit about the history of Iran and my grandfather and his relationship with the Shah's family. And so it was ingrained in me from a very young age about how the greatest mistake of the 20th century, one of the greatest mistakes, was the United States abandoning the Shah's regime and turning Iran over to the people running it today. And it was ingrained in me that a free and prosperous and Western-aligned Iran was really a force for stability, not just in the Middle East, but also for the world. And I really hope that someday Iran will be that again, because I know it will, looking at everyone in this room. Iran will one day be free and prosperous and a force for stability. So these are just some of the memories that I grew up with as a kid, and why I just feel such a close relationship with Iran. And it's great because I talk to my friends in school, and I'll say, oh, I have these great friends from Iran, and like, oh my God, like, Iran, it's a dangerous country. I'm like, no. Let me tell you, I know the Iranians, and they are great people, wonderful people. And in fact, my best friend from high school, he's sitting right over there, Shayar Ovaisi. As you can tell with the both names, Persian, his father was the Shah's general for the army, the top general for the Shah. And he's been my best friend for almost 35 years now. So again, just very close relationships with the people of Iran. I love the culture. I didn't understand what cooking was until Shayar cooked me a meal, and how great meat and lamb and chicken can be. I didn't understand that until I met Shayar. But really, so it's a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you for letting me share some of those memories.
Well, this relationship began, this extraordinary relationship between these two extraordinary men, when they met for the first time, young Shah, young Vice President of the United States in Tehran in 1953. The background of that meeting was the Cold War, and the immediate context was the Mossadegh coup, which had happened like 115 days before. Chris, can you fill in a little bit of that situation?
So, maybe this will be controversial, but I have a very different point of view of the Mossadegh regime as opposed to some others, and I think history is kind of catching up to that a little bit. But people forget that Mossadegh wasn't necessarily democratically elected. He was put in place by a parliament. People forget that, and again, different. Thank you. But we shouldn't turn him into something that he wasn't. Then, as you sort of move through history, there was a strong communist pro-Soviet Union movement going through Iran, tied into Mossadegh and the regime, and that was really a threat to what was going on in the world at the time as communism was on the move. So I think that when you think of the end of the Mossadegh regime, I think it's overstating it to say the CIA came in and told the Persians what to do and got rid of him. Anyone who has Persian friends knows you can't tell a Persian do this and they're going to do it. You can't do that. There was an upswell in the Iranian community that there needed to be a change, and that's what ushered in the Pahlavi regime. So I take a little bit of exception with how his history has traditionally treated the Mossadegh regime, and then how the Pahlavi regime came back to power. I have a slightly different point of view, and I hope that history catches up to that, because I think that we need to really appreciate the Pahlavi regime, what it meant for the United States, what it meant for the region, and I think to understand that, you also have to understand the beginnings, and that this was a Persian movement, that this was a movement of the people. To put Pahlavi back in place.
We've just found recently some Iranian news film of that first meeting in Tehran in December 1953. So we can be literally through this video, we can be present at the creation of that friendship.
و چون کوکبه میهمانان به سوی مقر اعلیحضرت همایون شاهنشاهی به حرکت درآمد، مسافرت معاون ریاست جمهوری ایالات متحده در ایران به پایان نزدیک میشد. آقای نیکسون و همسر ایشان به کاخ سلطنتی رفتند تا با میزبانان والاتبار خود خداحافظی کنند.
Noor, has your grandmother told you anything about the friendship, the relationship between your grandfather and Chris's grandfather?
Yeah, she always talks about how he was one of the leaders who really recognized the potential Iran had and the role it was playing and could, in his hope, continue to play as a pillar of stability in the Middle East, and the importance of maintaining that as a pillar. And also, he really recognized the dignity of the country itself, as well as the ambitions of my grandfather at the time to rapidly modernize the country while preserving its cultural fabric and identity. And that respect that he has is something that really stuck with her, as well as, the loyalty and the friendship that extended beyond their time in office, as you said. And I think there were so many people, of course, who turned their backs on our family when everything happened, but he was a steadfast friend, even when it was unpopular, even when the president at the time was discouraging people from, maintaining any sort of relationship or, anything to do with my family. He stuck by us, so it's really been something that my grandmother's always been grateful for.
Chris, you indicated that after Mama and Daddy, Shah was your first word. You were...
Not quite first word, but first political concept.
In that, right. First political concept. You were a teenager when your grandparents died. Did the president or Mrs. Nixon tell you anything about the relationship with the Shah, friendship with the Shah and the Shah Banu?
When you go through a downtime, you always remember who your friends were. And there was no need for your family and for the Shah to remain friends with my grandfather. It's almost detrimental that they did. But my grandfather and my parents would always tell me that there were a few people on the world stage who remained friends with my grandfather, and the Shah was top among them. And I would remember, I was probably just a twinkle in my parents' eye at this point, but I remember that my parents told me that they visited the Shah when he was in the hospital in New York. And it was probably controversial because I know that the Carter regime was trying to distance the United States from the Shah, but my grandfather had my parents visit the Shah, and then when the Shah passed away, my grandfather not only went to the funeral, he was the highest ranking American who went to the funeral. And he went with my dad, actually. I think that showed the depth of the relationship that as President Carter's administration was telling Americans and high-ranking Americans to stay away from the funeral. And I don't mean to overly politicize this, but my grandfather, he ignored that and went as the highest-ranking American. And I hope that shows the depth of the relationship.
And not to raise the flag even, yeah.
Yes, that's right, yes. And it shows just the strength and depth of the relationship between the two families and really, between the Persian people, my grandfather, and the United States.
Before that sad pilgrimage to Cairo for the Shah's funeral, the president, which was a year later than the president's trip in July of 1979 to Mexico, to Cuernavaca. I understand that trip got off to a bumpy start. Do you know?
Yes, I don't remember the history as well of the trip, but again, I just go back to the fact that the way the United States treated the Shah, it was just. The Shah was a great ally of the United States, was a great ally of the West, was frankly a great ally of the friendly countries in the Middle East to the United States. And I think that the way the Shah was treated after he left power was really an injustice that was done. It's something that I hope the historical record will correct. And also, I love what Princess Noor said, that the Shah really stood for modernity. He was modernizing Iran. And I just think what a difference today we would have if Iran had followed that path. What a difference today that would have made in the Middle East. What an example Iran would have been to other countries in the region. And it was just such a huge loss and such a strategic mistake by the United States. So it's an honor to be here with you today, to be here with all of you today, to share these recollections, because I think the world needs to know this. and needs to know what a force for good Iran and the Iranian people can be.
That trip to Cuernavaca meant a lot to President Nixon, and typically it had been planned meticulously, and then at the last minute there was an airstrike, so he couldn't fly out of San Diego, and he had to drive down to Tijuana and find an available Aeromexico plane to fly to Mexico City and then drive a couple of hours to Cuernavaca, and because that made them late, and the Shah stayed up, who was ailing, but stayed up until 2 a.m. for their arrival to be able to greet him personally and welcome him. And then the next day they had several hours of meetings. So you have talked about Cuernavaca, about Cairo, and about that loyalty. Noor, what does that loyalty, the Nixon loyalty, mean to you and to your family?
I think a lot about my dad's experience after the revolution and during the time his father was ill, which that all happened very suddenly. He had to grow up overnight when he lost his father and go to that funeral in a new capacity and, face so much uncertainty. He was so young, and without his father figure all of a sudden, I think having Nixon show up by his side and show that loyalty when so many people had turned their backs is something that I personally feel very grateful for, because I think he really needed it. I mean, he would never say and he would never talk about that feeling of, it's my mom who's so protective of him, who talks about, those who turn their backs. My dad doesn't notice that, but the loyalty really, really stuck with him, and I think gave him strength. So that's just something I feel like is so important for us to remember as a quality. He shows up when it's not popular. It was, it's not easy. He had something to lose by doing so, and to stand by his friends in such a time, it really shows a lot about who he was as a man.
As Joe and Parmis mentioned, the Nixon Foundation was honored to present the Architect of Peace Award. I think we have pictures to your grandmother and your father. Your grandmother is a remarkable woman. Tell us something about her. What have you learned from her?
Oh gosh, my grandmother is probably the person in my family that I have the most, in terms of our interests and how we like to spend our time in common with. So we're very close, and my best memories of her are both of us spending time in nature, on animals. We both love to paint, do watercolors, oil paintings, and in terms of who she is to me, she's really what makes me feel protected and safe no matter what. She's just stable, calm, and it inspires me to sort of be that person to the people around me as well, in times that are tough, and especially because she never shows it. And I think also she's such an example of how you can handle extreme grief with grace and channel it into purpose. It doesn't need to cripple you. You can, use it to propel you forward. And she is so driven by, her love for Iran, for Iranians, and her hope to see Iran freed. I think that carries her forward. And yeah, she's been through tremendous loss, and I find the way she's handled everything so inspiring.
As ambassador. As Ambassador Huckabee indicated in his message, things are moving fast on the ground in the Middle East. Some who say that military action should end now, and a deal should be struck with whatever is left, whatever rump of the Islamic Republic, of their leadership. Chris, Noor, do you have any feelings about that? Opinions?
I think, to me, the first thing that comes to mind is why, when there's so much to gain from the elimination of the Islamic Republic, from a free Iran that can serve as an ally to the United States, to Israel, to the Arab neighbors, to work as a bridge. And when Iran's greatest resource is its people, and its people have made clear that this regime does not represent them. Its people have paid with blood. They've continued to resist, to protest. They've lost their children. They're not going to accept this regime with a sea of blood between them. And legitimacy, stability comes from legitimacy, and legitimacy comes from the Iranian people. So I think I would advocate to just work with the Iranian people who are your allies. You know, the regime has been so weakened in this conflict. We don't need to throw them a lifeline. What will the next 10 years look like if we do versus if we don't? This is about a legacy of peace beyond this administration that could change the course of history, that could change the course of geopolitics. And I'm just going to say it, there is an alternative, and there is someone that people have died for in the streets, and that has a roadmap to rebuild the country, who has shown through decades of consistency and efforts to represent the voice of true Iranians on the global stage, who wants to act as a bridge, do the most difficult and dangerous part, lay down his life and put himself at risk, as he has for so many years, to return the voice to Iranians and to give them a say. It's his biggest dream, and I think that, you know, he's so pure in this motive to see that day where they can choose their form of government, and, you know, the country can start to prosper, and the youth can, you know, take their place in the global scheme, get the opportunities they deserve, you know, that people can come to Iran and see its beauty again, that tourism can be, you know, such a huge part once we actually can go and, you know, tend to the country that's been neglected for so many years. It's just, you know, there's so much to gain, and I hope that, you know, we focus on the big picture and recognize also that this is a regime that, you know, has broken its commitments time and again, misled negotiators, threatened and acted on the threats against America, that's fundamentally opposed to freedom, you know, accountability, like rule of law, and you can't work with this regime. How many times do we need to make the same mistake? So that's just my perspective, but.
Chris, in your grandfather's first term, he ended the Vietnam War, he opened relations with China, he established détente with the Soviet Union, and for his second term, he had a vision for the Middle East. America would always be Israel's staunchest ally, but could have good relations with the Arab nations, and Iran would be the pillar of stability, under the Shah, would be the pillar of stability in that region, and he had come a long way towards that goal when he resigned. And Noor, your grandfather had a dream of making Iran a leading economy and that pillar of stability in the Middle East. And you've talked a little bit about this, but what would Iran look like if your father's vision is realized? And what do you want the audience to take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I think it would look, you know, a democracy, a secular democracy where, you know, equal rights under the law, and where the culture of Iran is also restored and allowed to thrive. I think we've seen it be whitewashed over the past few decades, and the cultural identity in the heart of Iranians is so alive, and I would love to see the diaspora return to help rebuild. I think, like we talked about, picturing an Iran that's a positive participant on the global stage, eliminating the need for a constant military presence in the Middle East, dealing with the proxies of the Islamic Republic, and also the web of funding that extends to our soil as well, of their influence, you know, no longer exporting terror, but exporting peace and stability and partnership. I think Iran, like I said, the greatest resource are its people, and they need the chance to thrive, and they deserve that opportunity. And I think once we give them a chance, they'll not only be, you know, active participants in the world, but they'll help shape it in a way that's very positive. So I think that, you know, I hope that we get the chance to pull Iran out of the dark ages, and I think that it's only a light ahead after all of this darkness. So
Well, I don't think there's no doubt that you both make and do your grandparents proud. And please join me in thanking Noor Pahlavi and Chris Cox for an enlightening conversation.
Let's give another round of applause to our honored guests, Princess Noor and Christopher Nixon Cox. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Richard Nixon Foundation and our partners at PACAN, thank you for being with us today. It is our hope that gatherings like this one will help carry out President Nixon's vision of an Iran that exports peace to the world. Thank you again for being here with us, and enjoy your afternoon.